Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Tuesday, July the 8th, the day that President Macron meets Britain's political leaders, apart from Nigel Farage, who he snubs. All this in the first state visit by a European leader since Brexit. And my name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy of Politico, and welcome to the Stately Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics.
Before we get going properly, Anne, I discovered that some Labour ministers were in for quite the shock yesterday.
That's a bit of a drop intro, go on.
Well, after last week's utterly torrid week, I'm told that certain members of the government turned up for work yesterday morning only to find that their passes were disabled and that they couldn't get in. That's it, blocked, no entry. Had the punishment reshuffle begun, they wondered?
Bit Kremlin-esque, isn't it? Sort of corporate restructuring a la Vladimir Putin.
It did feel like that. In fact, it turns out that because it was the 1-year anniversary of Keir Starmer's government over the weekend, a bunch of the politicians' passes had expired. For whatever reason, the civil service give our elected leaders only 12-month entry to Whitehall's austere buildings, and they all needed to be renewed. Perhaps a sign of our politics that there's such a churn in ministerial appointments, or maybe a desire by the civil servants for control. Whatever happened, I think there was definitely a mini heart attack moment for some of our overlords. And by the way, on the subject of that torrid week last week, I do actually know of at least one government department after Rachel Reeves' tearful appearance at Prime Minister's Questions, that started informally updating what are known as reshuffle packs, the guides to your new ministers, should there be a snap reshuffle. Now, we don't actually think that a reshuffle is coming until the autumn now. We think that they did this kind of autonomously without guidance from the centre. But I was just thinking that there is a logic to getting it all done pre-summer, Anne, because it means that new cabinet ministers can read over the summer into their briefs, and that so we don't have yet more lost months. What do you think about the logic of a timing of a reshuffle?
Logic, we're way past logic, Sam. Did you see where we are in the last week? I would agree, in more stable circumstances, that may well have been the plan. I certainly know there was a lot of speculation from informed senior people, around arts administration, for instance, that Number 10 was seriously looking at changing the structure at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and then backed off it. I thought that wouldn't really be where they wanted to put their emphasis in these admin kind of changes at this point. Or that would suggest also some ministerial reshuffle that would have gone along with that. In the end, I think that was ditched, and I agree with you. I think they're looking for restabilization rather than change until we get back from the recess and things can calm down, and Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves at the high level can decide what strategy changes they need to make. And I think we can sense that by the fact that, as multiple moles told Playbook sleuths overnight, the Prime Minister held a reception, was on conspicuously good schmoozing form. Sometimes he does a sort of drive-by appearance, which drives the MPs mad because they put on their best bib and tucker, but he did talk about the achievements of the first year rather than be sitting in the back room with a Sharpie pen and an org chart. I think he wants to show that he's connected to his MPs, and reshuffle would get in the way of that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I've always thought he was quite a good schmoozer, Keir Starmer, better than some of his predecessors, for sure. That's one of the sort of good aspects of his character. The less good aspect, I think, in behind closed doors, is that he blames other people. Anyway, there are plenty of people blaming him. One of the complaints that I'm getting at the moment from cabinet teams is that we're quite late on into the process of sort of starting to get ready for conference. And there are complaints that they haven't even had the slightest steer what this year's autumn conference is going to be like in Liverpool. The kind of themes to start prepping speeches for. Really, at this point of the year, you need to start hunting for conference announcements, which is why the whole process it begins so far in advance of September. But there's nothing going on. So the whole sort of political timetable of this government is a bit up in the air, if you just want to add that to the list of complaints, of which there are many.
Conference is going to be about change, Sam. Change, something about change. Anyway, on with the day. It's Tuesday, so you should have a weekly polling update for us. And then I'll do the glamorous bit about the state visit, I think.
Great. Yes, this week's YouGov Sky Times poll. Reform at top On 26, they're unchanged. Only 2 points ahead of Labour on 24, which is also unchanged. Tories down one on 16, Lib Dems down one on 15, Greens up one on 11. So broadly, the picture's unchanged. Now, unusually for a Tuesday morning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop on and highlight another poll from another polling company. This is because my colleague Beth Rigby has got a package of stuff today on the politics of Wales. And as part of that, they've got more in common to do voting intention for next year's Senedd elections. And again, Reform on top on 28. The Nationalists plied on 26. Labour are down in third. Obviously, they hold it at the moment. Down in third on 23. Tories on 10, Lib Dems on 7. So Reform UK in the lead. And just to remind you, Anne, for those of our listeners who aren't completely across this, the Senedd has a new voting system next year, closed proportional list system. All that means is that the number of seats that a party or independent candidate wins will more closely reflect the percentage of the votes that they get. So I think those percentages that you get in that poll are even more scary for Labour. And there's no two ways about it. Labour are worried. Eluned Morgan, the Welsh First Minister, telling Beth that we think that the threat from Reform is very serious. Meanwhile, the loss of Wales from Labour to Reform, I had cabinet ministers saying last week that this could trigger the end of Keir Starmer. So stakes are massively high. And this seems like a very timely package from Beth. So watch that on Sky today.
I don't want to say it's funny, but it's striking that I heard a similar line used about a big early next year in the northeast in elections. And, this could trigger the end of Keir Starmer. Poor Keir Starmer. He's going to just go somewhere where people aren't talking about things that might mean my political demise. But let me crack on as the royal correspondent on the podcast today, because a French president and our own king means full flummery, full honours. Keir Starmer taking something of a supporting role on the opening day of President Macron's visit. I think the idea is to let the president and the king soak up the attention. Prince and Princess of Wales will be at Northolt this morning to greet them. They get their ride, then their carriage ride. I always call this the golden coach strategy when we want to be nice to a particular foreign leader. They get that in Windsor and a wonderful lunch and ceremonial stuff to boot. And then Macron hotfoots it back to London to address both houses of Parliament at just after 4. Now, the Elysee has been keeping its cards pretty close to its chest, Sam, on the contents of this speech. But fortunately, we have our Playbook Paris colleagues who were given something of a background briefing that it would be very powerful and very symbolic. And their take is that it is intended to signal the UK-French relations are back on track, with the two protagonists having that chance to publicly demonstrate their friendship. There's been close coordination, for instance, on the banquet running plan. We think, well, that's what the Elysee in the palace does best. But I gather there's been quite a lot of personal input there into the vibe and the roles there, and particularly for Brigitte Macron, who also likes to have a role. But there's also a clear target, isn't there, here, which is to get something over the line on that deal to tackle irregular migration, the so-called one in, one out deal, which sounds confusing. What do you reckon to it?
Well, the question is, can the pomp and ceremony get the hard yards of the politics over the line? This is going to be quite a moment of ceremony. This is the first ever state visit for Macron. And it'll build on that, what is said to be really quite a good personal relationship with the French president. I hadn't quite clocked this, but King Charles speaks fluent French, much better French than his mother. And it's the first state visit for a French president since 2008, when Nicolas Sarkozy was there. Do you remember that one, Anne, at all?
Oh, I do, because it's one of those moments that still makes me blush in retrospect. I was invited to some kind of pre-banquet event in Downing Street. It was I remember Sarah Brown was hosting in that sense. And I think it was focused on women, and upturned, of course, Carla Bruni, married to Nicolas Sarkozy. And she was just head to toe in the most beautiful Dior, and she is a supermodel. And she was very present. She was going around the room. She clearly wanted to shake hands. And I was focused on talking about some sort of drear bit of politics, turned around to find that Carla Bruni was standing behind me with her hand outstretched. They'd clearly been waiting for me to finish. So my protocol was not exactly on point and jabbering away about something. And I was so embarrassed, Sam, I just had a reflex action and I curtsied to her. And Sarah Brown, I could just see her, I knew this was going to go into her kind of memories of crazy things that had happened. So we talk about, Mr. Bean moment. I curtsied to completely the wrong person. But anyway, Calabrini was very charming, and I hope Macron is equally forgiving if she meets any somewhat confused members of the British press.
Well, between the two of us, that's not the most embarrassing thing that one of us has done at a Sarah Brown event, but surprisingly, and I'm not going to tell that story today. Anyway, a lot of focus on President Macron's wife, who wants to be called Mrs. Macron rather than Madame Macron, we are told, during her stay. There is a lot of politics and a lot of pomp. It isn't just the meeting with Keir Starmer that matters. There's been this very deliberate choice to snub Nigel Farage as I think President Macron taking a stand against populism, which is of course on the march all over Europe. Richard Tice, Nigel Farage's deputy, calling it an outrageous and deliberate snub, and also pointing out that Reform is polling higher than all the other parties. So he says that this is the establishment shutting its eyes. It's interesting. I think that the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, is planning to sort of use the meeting with President Macron to show that an alternative approach can be taken towards Donald Trump, and sort of would rather signal that the UK should be working with the French in order to respond to Trump's tariffs instead of going it alone. This is all part of the Lib Dems wanting to be part of the customs union, which would mean that we would all sort of negotiate communally and rather than severally over our tariff regime. So there's quite a lot of politics around that. But the bit that really, really matters is whether or not we can get a deal that's on most of the front pages over the line. This is what's called the one in, one out deal that Keir Starmer wants to strike with President Macron. And this would involve Britain being able to return small boat migrants to France in exchange for accepting asylum seekers who have a family connection to the UK. Yvette Cooper's been working on this deal for months. She's got a good relationship with the French Home Secretary, Bruno Retailleau, and it would mean law changes to maritime law. You could see slashing of boats by the French authorities, jet skis amongst the new tactics being imposed. The papers emphasise the sort of final yards of this negotiation being difficult. My hunch is that they'll get it over the line. I don't think that the objections from the Mediterranean countries are that significant. I think that both sides will want to be seen to sort of reset the page post-Brexit. And my goodness, does Keir Starmer need to do something about small boats? Because just as he hit his first anniversary over the weekend, turned out that this year's number of small boats are the highest ever. Even higher than the year to July 2023, which was the previous record. So he has to do something.
I have the same response as you, Sam. I know it's very complicated. I'm not saying it isn't, but I don't really believe that we're going to go home empty-handed, particularly given the scale of this state visit. It reminds me a bit of the talking about to the Germans before they came. Everything's very difficult. Will we get a deal? Will we get a deal? In fairness, the German one and the youth mobility scheme was so watered down that we ended up with an agreement to work towards something that clearly Keir Starmer found on immigration vibe hard to deliver. But as you say, I think this has been intently worked on. It's something where the pre-work's taken place between the Home Office and the Interior Ministry in France. And we saw those images there of those French guards slashing the boats, all those sort of dinghy boats last week. And I don't think we would see that unless something was coming down the line. The weeds of it, the numbers are also a little bit difficult, aren't they? Because there will be people saying, well, why did we have to do a one in, one out agreement when we want to stop the boats? The idea is just to bring all numbers down. But, you live in an imperfect world if in politics in that regard, and a deal is better than no deal. I should imagine there'd still be quite a lot of noises off about it, and they're going to come certainly from Reform in an even worse mood, not having been invited along to the summit.
That's right. And the Tories, to a certain extent, Chris Philp saying that actually the Brits should be asking for President Macron for a refund on all the payments that we've given to the French to help with the small boats. That hasn't really happened so far. That won't happen, of course, because the prize, if Keir Starmer manages to strike this deal with President Macron, is that Britain would wants desperately to be able to say that if you pay for your passage on a small boat, then you could find yourself on the way back to France, right? That which would amount to a deterrent is what maybe not as scary a deterrent as Rwanda, but that as a deterrent they hope will deter people from doing this. There is a short term downside that I think both the UK authorities and the French authorities recognise, I'm told, which is when the Rwanda deal was going through, suddenly the criminal gangs offering passage to the UK started to advertise what some people called closing down sales. In other words, what they claimed were discount rates because in the end they feared that the whole industry of taking people across the channel was gonna shut down, and the border force, I'm told, is warning, and the French authorities are warning that if they announce a deal that is post dated, then we could get a surge in crossings over the summer. And that these closing down sales could well pop up again. Now, a little bit of that will be Border Force and the French authorities sort of urging political leaders to get on with it. A little bit of that will be, I suspect, Home Office ministers wanting to get their excuses in early if there isn't a quick and precipitous drop in the numbers. But nevertheless, that's, I think, the authorities' way of saying we won't solve this problem immediately. Which will be tricky come conference season and the autumn.
That sounds right, doesn't it? Because you are dealing with a market here. It's a legal market, but it is a market. And I think you're absolutely right. But I suppose you could then make that case that you've got a difficult time up to conferences, but then the public will see the drop that Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper et al. Really want to see. Interesting, you've got to look at the driver on the French side, haven't you? And you say a lot of people are reporting this morning that there have been noises from Southern Europe about the idea of this deal. But I don't think Macron will mind that so much, Sam. He has that famously fraught on-off relationship with Giorgia Meloni, who is, I think, the main person who would have objections here. Why are you doing this deal when France and Italy have had such sort of terrible problems trying to sort out what they want to do? And Italy, in fairness to the Meloni case, just gets such a big sort of brunt of irregular arrivals when the seas are warm over the summer. But my sense is that Macron now wants to stand up pretty firmly on that. She sometimes has a go at him. He has a go back. It's very Cary Grant and Catherine Hepburn. But the idea that would stop this deal, I don't think the Elysée and Macron would want to give that power to Italy, in this sense, something of a strategic rival in dealing with irregular migration.
Yeah, the big problem for Keir Starmer is that if he says he's done a deal to solve this problem, we're all going to be hyper-focused on whether that is true. And it's not just the numbers, but we'll be following individual cases as they cross the channel to see whether they're sent back. There will be yet more TV crews in the channel watching to see whether the French uphold their promises. It gets harder before it gets easier. Just one other wrinkle of inconvenience for you in the way that I like to do, Anne. Another part of the deal, I was looking at Le Monde, albeit in English translation, AI translation this morning. And another thing that's under discussion is civil nuclear. And this, we think, according to Bloomberg, is that as part of the talks on Thursday, Keir Starmer and President Macron will announce that a deal has been reached for EDF to retain a stake in Sizewell C. That's the nuclear plant that was kind of given the green light in the spending review, and they'll talk about that. The wrinkle of inconvenience is that there are just concerns about that technology, which builds on this nuclear power plant at Flamerville and will also provide the basis for other nuclear reactors in the UK. there continue to be concerns about the just whether or not that technology is properly sustainable and works in quite the way that everybody desperately wants it to and needs it to. So when you hear about that, it's quite interesting reading up on it. Google it. It's just one of those things that is a inconvenient wrinkle in the narrative of our nuclear rebirth.
I think we should do a spin-off podcast called Wrinkle of Inconvenience, which would be about all the things in the weeds and in the background of projects that don't work out quite as well as the top line of the government announcements. But come on, let's get going. Listeners, let us know if you'd like Sam and I to make Wrinkle of Inconvenience available on all good platforms.
Biggest wrinkle of inconvenience in our lives is the 20-minute alarm, which has gone off. So with that, we say thank you very much indeed to Anne, and I will see you tomorrow for Wednesday's Politics of Sam and Anne's.
Wrinkled but unbowed. See you tomorrow.